Hello, Army. Welcome back to BTS News Today. What if everything you thought you saw on stage was only half the story? Because that night at Tokyo Dome, something shifted. It started like chaos, laughter, teasing, those wild, playful moments that had everyone screaming. The kind of energy that feels light, unserious, almost like it means nothing. But look closer. Every glance lasted a second too long. Every touch felt just a little too real. And then, just when no one expected it, everything changed. The noise faded, the distance disappeared, and in front of thousands, they held onto each other like the world had suddenly gone quiet. Not for show, not for the cameras, but like two people who forgot anyone else was even there. That hug, it wasn't just a moment. It was something deeper, something raw, something that left ARMY speechless and maybe even questioning everything. So, what really happened between them that night? Stay with me because this story isn't what you think. The truth is, moments like that don't just happen. Not on a stage that big. Not under lights that bright. Not in front of tens of thousands of eyes trained to catch every detail. Everything is supposed to be controlled, timed, rehearsed, perfected. But that night, something slipped through the cracks. It began earlier than most people realized. There was a shift in energy the moment they stepped onto the stage together. Subtle, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. The kind of tension that doesn't scream, but lingers. A glance that felt loaded. A smirk that didn't quite hide what was underneath. They played it off like they always do. Jokes, teasing, pushing each other just enough to make the crowd laugh. And then it escalated. That playful back and forth, the kind fans are used to, suddenly carried a different weight. The touches weren't just jokes anymore. They landed, paused, stayed, like both of them were testing something. Like there was a line neither of them had clearly defined, and they were dancing right on top of it. And the audience loved it. They always do. But here's what made it different. There was no clean break between performance and reality. Usually, there's a rhythm, high energy, then reset, then the next moment. That night, the transitions blurred. You could see it in the way they moved around each other. One would pull away only to drift back again seconds later. Not choreographed, not necessary, just instinct. And then came the silence. Not literal silence. The arena was still alive, still roaring, but something quieter beneath it. The kind of silence that exists between two people when everything else fades out. It happened so quickly that most didn't even register the shift. 1 second it was chaos, the next it was stillness. They stood close, too close for it to be casual, too natural for it to be staged. And then they embraced. Not the kind of hug meant to satisfy a crowd. Not a quick, friendly gesture before moving on. This one lingered. It held. It tightened. You could see it in their shoulders, in the way their hands pressed in, and how neither of them seemed in a hurry to let go. Time stretched. For a few seconds, maybe longer. It felt like the entire stadium was watching something they weren't supposed to fully understand. Something unspoken. Something unresolved. And that's where the questions begin. Because if it was just fan service, why did it feel so unguarded? Why did it last longer than it needed to? Why did it look like they forgot where they were? There's a difference between performance and instinct. And what happened in that moment didn't follow a script. When they finally pulled apart, everything snapped back into place. The lights, the music, the cheers, it all returned like nothing had happened. They smiled. They moved on. Professionals to the end. But something had already been revealed. Not in words, not in statements, but in a moment too real to ignore and too fleeting to fully explain. And maybe that's why it refuses to fade. Because the more you replay it, the harder it is to categorize. Was it just a performance detail taken too far? Or was it a glimpse into something they never intended to show? The answer isn't clear, and maybe it never will be. But one thing is certain. That night at Tokyo Dome didn't just give fans a moment to remember. It gave them something to question. From that point on, everything narrowed down to just them, Taekook. There's something unmistakable about the way two people move when they're completely aware of each other. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It shows in the smallest details, the timing, the pauses, the way one turns before the other even calls. That night, it was constant. Jungkook would move ahead, but his attention never fully left Taehyung. A glance over the shoulder, a half-second delay, like he was waiting. And Taehyung, he followed, but not in a way that felt rehearsed. It was softer, quieter, like he already knew where Jungkook would be before he got there. And then came the moment everyone keeps replaying. The teasing started again. Light, chaotic, familiar. Jungkook pushed the boundary first, bold as always, turning it into something playful, almost reckless. Taehyung didn't pull away. He answered it, matched it, returned it, back and forth. It looked like a joke, but the way they reacted to each other said otherwise. Jungkook laughed, but there was a sharpness in it, something more intense than the situation needed. Taehyung's expression shifted too quickly, like he was trying to keep up with something unspoken. For a brief second, neither of them broke eye contact. That's the part people miss because right after, they both turned it into entertainment again. Smiles, movement, noise. They dissolved it before it could linger too long in the open. But tension doesn't disappear that easily. It follows. You could see it building in the spaces between them. The way they drifted closer without acknowledging it. The way their interactions became shorter but heavier. Less exaggerated, more real. And then it broke. There was no warning. One moment they were still in motion, the next everything slowed. Jungkook stopped first. Taehyung turned toward him almost instantly, like he felt it without needing to see it. No call. No signal. Just instinct. And suddenly, they were face to face, with nothing left to hide behind. The crowd was still there. The lights were still blinding, but none of it seemed to matter. Jungkook closed the distance. Not dramatically, not for effect, just enough. Taehyung didn't hesitate. And when they finally moved into that embrace, it didn't feel like a continuation of the show. It felt like an interruption of it. Jungkook held on tighter than expected, his head lowering slightly, like he was trying to disappear into the moment. Taehyung's arms wrapped around him without adjustment, without hesitation, as if they'd done it 1,000 times before, but never like this. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Seconds passed. No one rushed them. No one could. Because whatever that was, it didn't belong to the performance anymore. When they finally let go, it wasn't clean. There was a pause. A fraction of a second where neither of them fully stepped back. Like something was unfinished. Like both of them felt it, but neither could afford to stay in it. So they did what they always do. They moved forward. Jungkook turned first this time, faster than before, almost like he needed the distance. Taehyung followed a beat later, his expression unreadable, but not unaffected. And just like that, the moment was gone. But not really, because moments like that don't disappear. They stay, in the way people replay them, in the questions they leave behind, in the silence between what was seen and what was felt. And with Taekook, that line has never been clear. That's what makes it impossible to look away. Because no matter how many times you watch it, it never feels any less real. After that embrace, something didn't reset the way it was supposed to. On a stage like that, moments come and go fast. Emotions are meant to rise, then disappear into the next beat of the performance. But with Taekook, it lingered. You could feel it in the space they left between each other. No longer careless. No longer chaotic. Now, it was measured. Jungkook kept moving, doing what he does best, engaging the crowd, lifting the energy, pulling attention back where it belonged. But there was a difference. Every time he passed near Taehyung, his pace shifted. Slower. Just for a second. Like he was recalibrating. Like he was aware of something he couldn't fully shake off. Taehyung, on the other hand, didn't chase the moment again. He stayed slightly behind at times, watching more than reacting. Not distant, but not fully present in the same way either.
There was a softness to him now.
Something quieter, like he was holding on to what just happened instead of letting it dissolve into the noise. And then came the walk. They moved across the stage together again, side by side, but not quite the same. Jungkook stepped forward first, mic in hand, voice steady. Taehyung followed, close enough to touch but choosing not to. That choice mattered. Because earlier, they hadn't hesitated. They crossed boundaries without thinking. But now there was awareness. Restraint. For a brief moment, Jungkook glanced sideways. It wasn't obvious. Most people would miss it, but it was there. A quick check. A silent question. Taehyung caught it. He always does. But instead of closing the distance again, he looked forward. And that's where everything shifted. Not in what they did, but in what they didn't do. The absence became louder than the action. They continued the show. Smiles returned. Energy rebuilt. The crowd never lost its momentum. To anyone watching casually, nothing had changed. But if you stayed with them, if you really watched, you could feel it. Something unfinished. Because that hug, it didn't resolve anything. It opened something. And neither of them closed it. By the time the stage lights began to dim and the final moments of a concert approached, they stood near each other again. Not touching. Not speaking directly. Just existing in the same space, with everything unsaid hanging quietly between them. Jungkook looked out at the crowd, soaking it in. But his expression flickered. Just for a second. Like his mind wasn't entirely there. Taehyung stood still, gaze softer now, almost distant, like he was replaying something no one else could see. They didn't need to repeat the moment. Maybe they couldn't. Because whatever happened earlier, it wasn't something you recreate on command. And that's what makes it stay. Not the hug itself. Not the teasing. Not even the way they moved around each other. But the shift after. The hesitation. The way two people who seemed so effortless suddenly became careful. And maybe the biggest question of all isn't what they showed. It's what they chose to hold back. As the final segment drew closer, the energy of the stadium should have been at its peak. But around Taekook, it felt different. Quieter. Heavier. They ended up near each other again, almost by accident. Or maybe not. Jungkook circled back first, slowing as he approached. Like he wasn't entirely sure how close to get this time. Taehyung noticed immediately. He didn't move away, but he didn't close the gap either. That space between them, it said everything. A few steps apart, yet completely aware. Every movement calculated now. Not careless like before. The kind of awareness that only shows up after something real has already happened. Jungkook shifted his weight, mic still in hand, saying something to the crowd. But his voice didn't quite match his eyes. Because for a split second, they flickered back to Taehyung. And Taehyung, he was already looking. Not surprised. Not caught off guard. Just waiting. That's when it almost happened again. Jungkook took a step forward. Small. Almost unnoticeable. The distance closed just enough to feel familiar. Like they were about to fall back into that same moment. The same instinct. The same pull. But this time something stopped it. Not the crowd. Not the cameras. Taehyung's expression softened. But there was restraint now. Like he understood exactly where that step would lead if they didn't hold back. And Jungkook, he hesitated. For the first time that night, he didn't follow through. The moment hovered there, suspended, unfinished. And then it passed. Just like that. Jungkook turned slightly, redirecting his attention outward again. Rebuilding the distance he had just tried to erase. Taehyung exhaled. Subtle. Almost invisible. But enough to show he felt it too. Because sometimes, the loudest moments are the ones that don't happen. The rest of the stage continued like nothing was missing. Final speeches, laughter, the kind of closing energy everyone expects. They stood with the others. Played their roles perfectly. Gave the audience everything they came for. But not everything. There was still something left behind in that space between them. Unspoken. Unresolved. And maybe that's why it lingers more than anything else. Not the hug. Not the teasing. But that almost. The step that wasn't completed. The distance that wasn't crossed. The moment that chose not to exist, even though it could have. Because whatever that was between them, it didn't end on that stage. It paused. And the real question is, what happens when something like that doesn't get finished?